There are lives that begin softly, in silence, and others that begin as if the world itself were trembling at their arrival. Spinoza's life starts like a quiet rebellion, one that the newborn himself does not yet understand. Imagine this scene. A tiny infant opening his eyes not in the warm sun of Portugal, the land of his ancestors, but in the damp, echoing streets of Amsterdam. Why there? Because his birth was already the result of a flight. His family had escaped a country where faith was monitored, scripted, and forced into a narrow frame of obedience. They left behind familiar landscapes because the price of staying was to betray themselves. This means Spinoza enters the world as a refugee of conscience before he can speak a single word. And yet, within the walls of his modest home, something extraordinary happens. The Portuguese language fills the air. Hebrew prayers whisper through the rooms, and stories of survival and quiet resistance hang like invisible tapestries. He grows not among certainties, but among cracks in which questions can grow. His childhood is shaped by two forces, loss and brilliance. He loses his mother when he is only 6, and the absence becomes a silent companion, a shadow that sharpens a sense of interiority. But at school, something else appears just as early, the spark of an unusual intelligence. Teachers notice the precision of his memory, the sharpness of his questions, the way he listens not to confirm what he already knows, but to uncover what nobody wants to say out loud. While other children memorize rules, he interrogates them. While they repeat, he dissects. Nothing is taken at face value, not even the sacred words he is taught to revere. It is as if the very act of thinking becomes his form of self-preservation. The world around him teaches obedience. Spinoza's mind responds with exploration. No one yet imagines the magnitude of the philosopher he will become. But already, beneath the quiet surface of this adolescence shaped by exile, by study, and by restlessness, something is unfolding. Something that will one day challenge kings, religions, and the very idea of God itself. Spinoza's youth could have followed a predictable path. He was destined, at least in appearance, for a respectable future within his community. Diligent student, promising mind, a quiet ascent through religious learning. But thinking has its own gravity, and for someone like him, it pulls downward, toward deeper layers, toward what others prefer left untouched. Around the age of 15, he begins to sense it. The unease that creeps in when you repeat answers that no longer convince you. His teachers offer certainties. He feels only fractures. Their explanations feel smooth on the surface, yet strangely hollow when he tries to hold them inside his mind. He hides his irritation behind a respectful silence. But doubt is not something you bury. It grows like a pressure behind the temples. And the world outside the school offers plenty of room for it to expand. When Spinoza takes over part of the family's import business, he steps into the chaotic brilliance of Amsterdam's canals. Their boats are not just vessels. They are veins through which ideas circulate as freely as goods. Merchants talk politics between shipments of fruit. Refugees discuss theology while bargaining prices. Scientists argue about motion, stars, lenses, and the strange new mathematics that promise to rewrite everything. For a young mind already vibrating with questions, this environment is electric. Every conversation is an opening. Every encounter shifts the borders of what he believes possible. It is here, among crates and water-soaked ropes, that he catches his first real glimpse of a world where truth is not inherited, but discovered. And then comes a meeting that will rearrange his intellectual destiny. Seeking a teacher of Latin, the gateway to philosophical and scientific texts, Spinoza enters the home of Franciscus van den Enden. The place feels less like a residence and more like a laboratory of restless minds. Plays are rehearsed in one room. Arguments about geometry erupt in another. Political ideas drift like smoke from the upstairs library. Van den Enden, sharp, irreverent, and unapologetically free, becomes not merely a teacher, but a catalyst. Under his guidance, Spinoza is introduced to Plato's dialogues, Aristotle's rigor, the Stoics' resilience, and most importantly, to the rational clarity of Descartes. With each new text, he feels the walls of dogma loosening. Thought becomes a territory, not a prison. Reason becomes a tool, not an enemy. In this house, illuminated by candles and contradiction, Spinoza discovers something essential, that a mind can be loyal to truth even when it abandons tradition. And once that revelation has taken root, There is no return. There comes a moment in some lives when the world turns, quietly at first, and then with brutal clarity. For Spinoza, this turning begins not with grand philosophical statement, but with murmurs, whispers in corners of synagogues, glances exchanged between elders, silences that last a little too long. His curiosity, once tolerated, begins to look dangerous. His companionship with free thinkers, once dismissed as youthful eccentricity, becomes a stain. Rumors spread that he reads Descartes with too much fascination, that he questions too boldly, that he attends theatrical performances with people whose beliefs are problematic. Doubt, which for him was a path toward truth, is for others a threat to stability, and stability always fights back. No one knows exactly when the fear in the community turns into hostility, but the shift becomes unmistakable. One evening, after participating in a small theatrical gathering organized by Van den Enden, Spinoza steps into the street. The air is cool, the city dimly lit by oil lamps, and in the uncertain shadows a figure emerges. A flash of metal, a swift movement, and Spinoza finds himself dodging a knife aimed not at philosophy, but at his body. He survives, barely, but something essential breaks, the illusion that ideas can be questioned without consequence. He keeps the torn cloak from that night, not out of pride, but as a reminder of what thinking freely can cost. And yet, he refuses to bend, refuses to apologize for seeking coherence where others offer obedience. Then, at 24, the door closes for good. The decision is read publicly, in a ritual meant to expel not only a man, but a presence, a possibility, a mistake to be erased. The Hurem, the word falls like a stone. The declaration is furious, absolute, almost theatrical in its intensity. It casts him out from his community, from its rights, its commerce, its protection. It cuts not just ties, but belonging. What others might experience as ruin becomes, for Spinoza, a strange moment of clarity. There is pain, certainly, a wound deeper than the slash in his cloak. But beneath the pain, a quiet resolve. If belonging demands silence, he chooses solitude. If loyalty demands intellectual surrender, he chooses exile. He walks away with nothing but his books, his questions, and an unshakable conviction that truth cannot be negotiated. And in that silence, harsh and absolute, a philosopher is born not by acceptance, but by exclusion. Exile can break a person or refine them. For Spinoza, it becomes a kind of internal architecture, a space where thought can grow without interruption. After his expulsion, he doesn't rush into public debates or seek revenge in the form of grand declarations. Instead, he slips into a life that feels almost invisible from the outside. 6 years vanish into a deliberate quietness, as if he were turning his own mind into a workshop. He reads with the hunger of someone who no longer seeks permission to understand. He writes with the patience of a craftsman shaping something meant to last far longer than his own fragile life. And slowly, the foundations of new philosophy begin to take form, dense, subtle, meticulously ordered. His move to Regensburg marks the beginning of a new rhythm. The village is modest, peaceful, and close enough to the University of Leiden to grant him access to the newest scientific debates. Here, Spinoza's days become predictable in the most productive way. Mornings polishing lenses, afternoons writing, evenings spent in correspondence with thinkers from across Europe. The lens work is not just a job. It becomes a metaphor for his intellectual path. With every polished surface, he makes vision clearer. With every adjustment, he trains his patience. Philosophers often speak of clarity. Spinoza earns it with his hands. Despite his withdrawal from public religious life, he is anything but isolated intellectually. Letters arrive from scholars, theologians, mathematicians, some curious, some cautious, some quietly admiring precision of his emerging ideas. His discussions range from geometry to metaphysics, from politics to the nature of God. A small circle of friends forms around him, people who recognize that beneath his calm demeanor lies a radical transformation of the philosophical landscape. It is during this period that he composes early works interpreting and reorganizing Descartes' philosophy, texts that serve not as imitation, but as proof of how deeply he has absorbed and surpassed his teacher. And as political tensions rise in the country, censorship tightening, suspicion spreading, Spinoza senses that the world is moving toward a storm, yet he continues to write unshaken. He is not trying to provoke. He is trying to clarify. If others fear the consequences of new ideas, he fears only confusion. His solitude is not a retreat from the world, but a preparation for the intellectual upheaval he knows he is destined to unleash. In Regensburg, with nothing but ink, lenses, and silence, Spinoza becomes something rare, a thinker who builds freedom from the inside out. For years, Spinoza worked in the protective hush of small rooms, letters, and polished lenses. But storms have a way of finding those who refuse to close their eyes. The Dutch Republic, once a beacon of tolerance, begins to tighten its grip. Fear spreads through institutions like a slow poison. Books are watched. Preachers agitate. Authorities whisper that too much freedom will crumble the moral order. And in the middle of this shift stands Spinoza, a man who asks only for the right to understand. His friends are not spared. Adrian Korbag, bold and unafraid to criticize religious authority, is arrested, pressured, and pushed toward public recantation. When he refuses to betray his convictions, the punishment grows harsher. He dies in prison, another casualty of society frightened by its own reflection. Van den Enden, the mentor who once opened Spinoza's mind to a wider horizon, meets an even stranger fate. Entangled in a failed Republican plot in France, he is executed. Their deaths are not just personal losses. They are warnings carved into the political landscape. It is in this tense atmosphere that Spinoza publishes one of the most daring works of his time, the Theological Political Treatise. Anonymous, of course, not out of cowardice, but out of strategic clarity. The book defends a principle that he considers non-negotiable, the freedom to philosophize. He argues that thought cannot be policed, that interpretation is not a crime, and that a state which fears ideas will inevitably fear its own citizens. The reaction is immediate. Flames of outrage erupt from pulpits and universities alike. The treatise is denounced as dangerous, impious, destructive. Authorities ban it outright. Pastors accuse this anonymous author of attempting to dissolve the foundations of faith and society. And yet the arguments spread, moving quietly through intellectual circles, unsettling the structures meant to contain them. Spinoza watches all this with composure that seems almost impossible. He never denies writing the book, but he refuses to confirm it either. What matters to him is not the spectacle, but the principle. The freedom he defends is larger than any controversy, larger even than his own life. He knows the risk. He feels the pressure tightening around him. But retreat is not an option. Not now. Not after seeing what suppression does to bright minds. Not after burying friends whose only crime was thinking too clearly. If the world is becoming hostile to philosophy, then philosophy must learn to be stronger than the world. By the time Spinoza settles in The Hague, his life has taken on the texture of a long twilight. Not a darkness, but a muted glow, the kind that appears just before dawn, when the world is quiet enough for thought to breathe. His health is fragile, worn down by years of grinding glass, inhaling the fine dust of his craft. Each lens he polishes sharpens someone else's vision, but slowly dims his own life. And yet he does not stop. He continues writing with a patience that borders on ascetic devotion. His great work, The Ethics, grows into a geometric cathedral of ideas. Precise, symmetrical, demanding. He knows the risks of publishing it while alive, the rage it would provoke, the accusations it would unleash, so he hesitates, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. Philosophy, for him, is not a provocation. It is a craft meant to elevate clarity, not ignite chaos. At the same time, he works on a new political treatise, one that might have extended his bold defense of freedom into new territory. But his health declines faster than his pen can move. Friends notice the fatigue in his voice, the thinness of his breath, the way he pauses mid-sentence, as if measuring how many words his lungs are willing to offer. On a winter day in 1677, at only 38 years old, Spinoza's body finally surrenders. There is no dramatic scene, no philosophical last words, just a quiet departure from a life that had already become inseparable from its ideas. His friends, shocked but loyal, move quickly. They gather his manuscripts, protect them from censorship, and prepare them for publication. And then something extraordinary happens. The works he dared not print while alive, ethics, the unfinished treatises, his correspondence, are released into a world still unsure of what to do with such clarity. At first, the reaction is predictable: condemnation, suspicion, and accusations of atheism. But slowly, like light passing through a lens, his ideas begin to focus minds across Europe. Thinkers read him in secret. Scientists quote him. Philosophers either fight him or follow him, but none can ignore him. His vision of God as nature, his insistence that freedom begins with understanding, his belief that the mind grows stronger through clarity, all of it becomes part of the intellectual bloodstream of the modern world. Spinoza dies in obscurity, but his ideas do not. They move across centuries, carried by readers who find in his quiet rigor a new way to see. He is gone, but the light he clarified, patiently, relentlessly, still travels. Not through lenses now, but through minds,